In 2004, I started an ethnographic, a qualitative ethnographic study of student learning in elementary schools. And initially I had started because I wanted to educate myself on what young children could learn, right? Can they, I know that they can learn science, as this body of knowledge, they can learn science as, this method, but really how is it that we can talk about inquiry and the nature of scientific evidence and the nature of scientific knowledge? To do this, I ended up co-planning and co-teaching with second grade, third grade, fourth grade teachers over a number of years. And we videotaped and audio taped all of our work together. I also involved doing co-generative dialogues and interviews, a lot of interaction with the students in science classrooms as well as during lunch and after school. So I was really in the school quite a lot. And completely immersed in their science education. Our findings so far are two main things. One is that, yes, kids can actually think about how it is that we know what we know, and they can be very critical about knowledge as it's being generated and thinking about that. And the other finding that was fairly significant was this idea that no matter what you do, you're generating in your actions as teachers and as students a classroom ethos of science. And so I can give you examples from those two different areas. In the first, kind of looking at how kids think about doing experiments, they have an example of them being very prospective. So as they're developing an experiment, we were studying soil invertebrates, and they were studying mealworms at one point, and they were interested in, does it like these different conditions? And in the discussion of planning the experiment, these kids, second grade, were clearly prospective, thinking about, well, if we set it up this way and this happens, what are we going to do? And then they would have a discussion like, oh, maybe we should change things around, maybe we should try different setups. And so this was kind of looking at whether or not the animals preferred a moist environment or a dry environment. So they ended up with like 6 different experimental setups to test their ideas. But then as they were getting data, so they're actually conducting experiments, there was lots of discussion during that time about whether or not their tests were fair. So this is second grade, and the idea is that kids are not conscious of conducting a fair test or why they should and identifying these variables, and they're doing that. We didn't tell them that. We didn't talk about that. We didn't prompt that. It was just impromptu conversation that was coming because they were conducting these investigations and really interested in finding out what the answer was. And then in terms of analyzing their findings, like looking at the data that they were actually getting from these experiments, it was kind of unexpected. So what happened was there was no clear answer, right? Sometimes the mealworms were kind of all over the place, but one thing, there was a little trend where it seemed that a lot of them were going up to the edge of the wet paper towel or the wet area that they had made, and even though they had predicted they would like the dry because that's kind of where they like to live, and so there was lots of discussion about why it was that this was the outcome. And it was really interesting because it turned out that they hadn't been giving the mealworms a water source in their habitat for a while, so the things were probably really thirsty. And so it made sense in this case that although they prefer a drier habitat, that they actually were going up to the edge to drink, and a lot of kids were just looking and trying to see if they could see if they were drinking. In terms of developing the classroom ethos, what we notice is, like I said, this is developing whether or not you're paying attention to it at all. And even in our efforts of, we were trying to really make sure that we were having students do investigations in the classroom. Even when we did that, we found that students were always more skeptical of their peers than they were of authoritative sources, any kind of authoritative source, teacher, book, parent, sibling, whatever. And we realized that our goal is to kind of move towards an open classroom of thinking about knowledge and about what we're generating, so that kids are skeptical and open-minded, and it's friendly, but that all sources are worthy of skepticism or open-mindedness. They're all worthy of our examination, regardless of what the source is. And so that's kind of what how I'm continuing to work and look at that.